Welcome to the November 2023 CIECA Technical Webinar, 2023 R2 Highlights and Update on CIECA API Standards. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenters are Paulette Reed, Technical Program Manager for CIECA, Dan Webster, Chair of the CIECA Architecture Committee and Principal Architect at Enlight, Andy Bober, Software Engineer at Integral, Mike Hastings, Product Manager at CarParts.com, and Jeff Schroeder, CEO and founder of CarParts.com. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you that there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenters. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A panel on the webinar screen, and we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn the program over to Paulette Reed.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to all of our presenters today. I wanted to go over our agenda real briefly. We're going to do a BMS update to let you know the changes that we have going on with the BMS. Then we're going to discuss what is CAPIS and how can it help your organization. And then we're going to give you a CAPIS update that has some current members that are using that as an implementation, and they're going to discuss that with you. Then we're going to have the using the CIECA standards with the popular tools, some demos with Stoplight and Postman, and then Microsoft VS Code and Oxygen. And then our last slides and presentations will be how do you get to this information. So to start off, our 2023 R2 v6.8.0, which is our new BMS changes, we did not have any actual changes to our large BMS Word document. However, we did have a number of code list additions. For attachment type code list, the calibration committee added 11 different codes. Those are displayed on the screen. And the line item category code list, we had a member request to add 7 new ADAS codes, and those are on the screen. The other changes that we had was our test instances. So we had 25 plus test instances. Some of those were to validate, of course, those new codes, but then with CIECA Simplified and the way that we are moving those Word document implementation guides onto CIECA.com, that way every time that we do a test, when we're doing our Q&A, it will run through all of the implementation guides that we have and do a test on those. So those were also moved over. So that was our major changes to our BMS release. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Jeff to discuss what is CAPIS.
I'm expecting to see the new slide.
What is CAPIS? Do you see it, Dan?
I don't, but I'll go ahead anyway. As you know, the CAPIS, it's the second bullet, is the CIECA API standard, and it's our third generation in JSON. I think a lot of what we've worked on so hard over the last few years is really spelled out pretty well on the slide already. But the interesting thing we've had a lot of talk about lately is how BMS is so big and intimidating, complicated for people. And besides using the new technologies of OpenAPI and JSON, the main thing we did was this highlighted element about zero-based budgeting. And that's the concept that you don't just copy things from the old version of the CIECA standard to the new one, just because they were always there in EMS or BMS, but we're trimming it down to just the services we're addressing in our first 2 releases, and it only brings the BMS-based fields based on a principle that we use it not because it was in the old version, but because they're actually going to be used in an implementation of some participating member. And we've had very good success. People like the look of it, and it seems smaller and simpler as anything would if you left out the things we're not going to use. And we've organized it into various components, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But CAPIS is the new next generation. It's using the new technologies, and it's smaller and very much deliberately so, and ought to be welcome for folks who are familiar with EMS and not so familiar or aren't liking BMS quite so much.
Dan, I don't know if you could see, but I switched it to the next slide. So this is the different versions of CAPIS. We had our first version, which is the 0.01 that Mitchell and Dan is using. And then we have the CAPIS 0.1.0, which CarPart will do a discussion on their implementation.
Great. Thank you, Paulette. So yeah, I'm going to tell you about how last year's release of CAPIS version 0.0.1 has been the basis for integrations that we've been building at Mitchell in the last year. Things that in the summer of 2022, we were talking about in the CIECA Architecture Committee. We said the true intellectual property of CIECA was the data dictionary, our data elements and code lists that have evolved through the generations of EDI, DBase, XML, and now JSON. And you see here in parentheses, BADD stands for our pet name for it, the Big Ass Data Dictionary. And using that, we defined all of the data elements and objects for claim, for vehicle, and for parties, what we previously called admin info. And these are the first services that we undertook as going forward to the next version of the standard. And we did code lists in a big JSON file, what since 1994 had been put in Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. And the CAPIS 001 schemas themselves took the form of a separate schema files for claim, for parties, for vehicle, and one for all three mashed together, vehicle, parties, claim. This third combined one, Mitchell has found very useful in our initial implementation of the claim API and an assignment API. In addition to these artifacts, the framework evolved from our BMS tools has been set up. And now I'm talking about CIECA, not Mitchell. The Architecture Committee now has very effective tools for any interface schema to have the Big Ass Dictionary, referencing it in a growing array of endpoint schemas with test instances showing how the actual schemas can be used for an implementation, and then a batch validation script that can validate hundreds of instances in seconds. And I got to tell you, this comes in really handy, both in CIECA committee work and for Mitchell's production work, to be able to change things and test them instantly. Lastly, the CAPIS standard contains one reference open API specification document showing how in the modern world of REST API, CIECA can give members a jump start in using Open API, formerly known as Swagger, to provide the new age implementation guides for their APIs. So you'll find in the CAPIS release, we provide this reference of how you might do an Open API specification for claims, and we've output that in both JSON and YAML formats. You're up, Jeff.
Thanks, Dan. So CarPart was working on an implementation where our management system wanted to do parts ordering through our marketplace. And so we went ahead and started with the work, the work that had already been done in architecture with CAPIS 001, and we added some additional objects and properties to the Big Ass Dictionary. Specifically, we added companies, contacts, parts, and users. And we also made some additions to the code lists, did a little bit of trimming to it, and that's the version that's out live today. There are some endpoint schema examples that are also included in the standard. That's a CAPIS part invoice schema and a CAPIS parts message schema. And basically we used the business cases as we created parts invoices, payments, and fulfillment updates. And we were able to do that with test instances being provided, and also using tools, Stoplight Studio and Postman, which Mike will cover in the next piece of the presentation. You're up, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Hastings with carpart.com. I'm a member of the CIECA Architecture Committee. I've been helping out creating the JSON schemas and also the Open API, the claim service. And I'm going to share my screen. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to import our new claim service Open API reference file into both Stoplight Studio and Postman. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay. So right now I'm in Stoplight Studio. I've got our project list up. I'm going to create a new project. Click on the new project. I'm going to call it Claim Service. And I'm going to click here to create an API project. So it's working away. It'll come up and give me a couple of options. You know, one of them is I can create a new API, or I can import an Open API reference file. And you can see up here, you get those options. I'm going to click here to import a reference file. And I'm going to navigate to my CIECA, our new release. And go into the reference files. One thing we give you an option. You can actually import a JSON reference file or a YAML. And I'm going to show how to do the JSON file here. So right now it's actually importing the CAPIS claim service Open API specification. And you can see it looks like it's completed. It puts you in the edit mode when you import a reference file. I click here on the publish button. That's pretty much the same as saving my project. And I should be able to actually show you. So when I click here, you can see there's like two panes on the column on the left. Actually kind of shows you the different methods and functions you can do. It also shows the schema. And then on the right side, you can see basically it shows the, okay, let me cancel out of that. It shows you the Open API forms. And you can see at the top, you can give it a kind of a summary of what the API is. You can actually set up servers. So in this case, you can do multiple. I set up a CIECA development server environment, a QA environment, a production environment. You can set up the authentication. And for this API, we're actually using a bearer token to authenticate. I can put a contact in here, and they allow you to set a license up if the API is licensed. The other thing I could do is I can actually show you some of the methods down here. The first one here, if you want to create a new claim folder, I'll show you the create new. And basically, we're using a post. You provide an object, which is basically the vehicle parties claim object, and it'll actually send and create a new claim folder with that. One of the things I wanted to show in here is There's also a code. You can, right now I'm looking at the form. You can actually click on code and it'll take you right into either the YAML or the JSON code, and you can actually edit this code and save and publish as well. But what I found is probably 90% of it you can do within these forms here, and pretty much create most of the API using the form editor, which is really convenient. The other thing I'll mention is you can see up here we have a get. So once you've created a new claim folder, you can actually provide a parameter on the query, basically called claim number. And by performing a get, you can actually pull a claim folder from the web service. And we also provide a put. Put allows you to actually send up do an update. You send a complete new claim folder, it'll update the existing one. We provide a patch. The patch will actually allow you to update a couple of the fields within the claim folder. And then we have delete claim folder. And the delete will allow you to actually go and delete the resource. You can see all of these functions here, the get, the patch, the delete, and the put, they all require a claim number. And the other view that we have within, let's see here, if I go back to the document view, so right now I just I basically closed out of the edit mode and I'm in what's called the documentation mode. Kind of gives you a different view of the services. I come down here and it's a little bit more user friendly. So right now I brought up the get claim folder. It'll actually, you can provide examples. So you can see over here, this is kind of an example that we've created. And I believe within the Open API document, we have probably 6 or 8 different examples you can look at. And the one other thing I was going to mention is if you were to wanted to go in with Stoplight, create your own API, you go into edit mode and let's see here, you click on the plus and you can come down where it says import file. So what you would do here is you would actually import your what we call endpoint schema. And once you've imported that, you can use that schema. Actually, Stoplight Studio calls it a model. You can use that model within your messages, within your request and your response messages. And so that kind of gives you an overview of Stoplight Studio. I find Stoplight Studio is a really good tool to create new APIs and also document APIs. The next thing I'm going to do is show you how to do the same thing pretty much in Postman. And a little bit about Postman. I've been using Postman for over 10 years. It's a really, really good tool for testing web services, APIs, REST, anything to do with, HTTP messaging. And okay, so if you look over here, there's on the left, there's collections, there's APIs, and there's environments. Basically, what collections is, that's kind of where you go and create your test projects. APIs is basically where you can go and create author or import open API specifications. And then environments is kind of where you go set up your global variables for your test scripts. What we're going to do, we're going to go to API, and I'm going to do an import. And we're going to import that same claim service. And basically, there's an option. Do you want to import it into a collection or into an API? We want to import it into an API. So I'll click import. It takes a few seconds. Okay. Okay, so you can see our claim service came up. If I click here on the definitions, I can go into the claim service root. And basically, you'll see very similar to what we had in Stoplight Studio. On the left side, you'll see kind of the layout of, it's kind of more of a forms type view. And then on the right side, we have the code view. So you can you can basically edit, change the open API within this section here. It's not quite as friendly as Stoplight Studio, but it is doable. One thing I'll mention is the Open API 3.1 support from Postman's only been out for about half a year, and I believe they continue to improve it. If I go down to the claim service section here, one thing I can do is let's see here, view documentation, and it'll bring up pretty much a documentation view of the Open API, all the methods and functions. If I go down and I click on one of these methods, like let's select post, create a new claim, the default view within Postman is actually the test view. So this basically comes up with the URL to the endpoint. You can go into headers, you can set up your authorization, your bearer token, and then you can actually copy and paste a test message in here and click on send, and that allows you to actually test the messages or test the API. The other thing I'll point out in collections, so when we imported the API, it automatically created a project collection called Claim Service. And that's real handy because that allows you to go and, let's see here. You can go in here and you can actually start working on your test scripts and whatnot, or test cases. And this kind of completes my demo of Stoplight Studio and Postman. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to talk a little bit about JSON schemas and validation. And let's see here. So I'll stop sharing. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Bober. I'm one of the software engineers at Integral, and I'm going to go over 2 tools and how to use those tools to do JSON schema validation with. And the first one I'm going to show is VS Code. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so here we are in VS Code, and one of the ways that you can do this JSON schema validation in VS Code is with the built-in functionality within VS Code itself. You don't have to download any plugins or anything, just the application itself. And so to configure that, there's a file called settings.json, and there's a couple of those. There's one that is global, there's one that is specific to your user, and then there's one that's specific to the workspace. Now, the one that I have highlighted here is going to be the one that's specific to the workspace. And that seems to be the one that works the best for me, because that way I can configure things on a per workspace basis, which is usually where I need to have them. So the way you read this is this settings file. It has these JSON related settings in there, and the 2 that are important really is the file match here and the URL, and it's under the JSON.schemas. And what we're doing is associating a particular schema with the instances. And the instances in this case, we're not specifying any subdirectories here or anything. This is just every JSON file we're going to try and validate against this particular schema. So they do give you a way to exclude things with the little exclamation point there. So we want to exclude things that we know aren't going to be validated. So these 2 files that are already in here, launch.json and settings.json. So we exclude those, and then we use this validation here. And so if we look at the actual settings file, let's go ahead and take a look at the well, just so you could see what's actually here. And then if we could take a look at the schema, look at this is a very, very basic schema. It just has one object in here, and it has 2 properties, owner and a vehicle. And the owner and the vehicle are both defined below, and they both have to have a couple of properties, and both of them are required for it to be valid. So if we take a look here at an instance, notice it's validating it already based on those settings that we have. All you have to do validation in VS Code is to configure it, and once it's configured, it just does it. And not only does it do the validation, but it does code completion for you as well. And it doesn't have to be actual, JavaScript code or whatever. It can do it specifically with these data files as well. So here you could see there's a squiggly under the top level, the opening parentheses, and it's saying that it's missing that second property, the vehicle property, that was right here. I had it highlighted. And so it's missing that, and you can see that it's got owner, but owner is missing last name, as it says. And so I can go ahead and use code completion to have it tell me what these are the things that are in there. There's a date of birth and there's a last name, but we know that last name is not it's required. So that fixes that. You can see the squiggly's gone there, and if we look at this one, we still need this other one, the vehicle. So I can go ahead and do the same thing. Do code completion, pick the vehicle, it puts in the type, which is another object, and code completion again. You need a make, and we're going to need a model and a year. Oh, whoops. There we go. It puts in default values for everything, and that is successfully making that one validate against the schema. So let's take a look at translating this into using it with our new CAPIS specification. So here I've got another workspace open, and this is that same settings file. And you can see it's much more complicated, but the same important values are in here. The file match, the way we want to match the individual instances and relate those back to a schema. And so here, rather than taking all JSON files, we're only taking certain ones down this path. As you can see, so here we've got the claims, and that corresponds to the claim subdirectory over here. And if we look down farther under these subdirectories, we've got claim, parties, invoice, etc. And you can see those are all in here: parties, claim, parties, parts invoice, etc. All the other ones are down here. And so you can all, once you have them configured, then you're just good to go ahead and take a look at it. So with this one, it might be hard to see the actual validation error here, but over on the right side, you can see that things are highlighted in yellow down there. So we could just scroll down to where those are. And here you could see it's validating. And so there it is. All we have to do is configure the validation, and it just works. And it works out of the box, like I said, with VS Code. So to summarize with VS Code, you have to configure it. It has to be done in the settings.json file. And you can configure it in such a way where you're referencing subdirectories like I've chosen to do here. Or if I go back to the other one, the simpler one, you could see that this is where we just said take any .json file and try and validate it against here, but we could rule a couple of things out. All right, so that's VS Code. So how about another tool? This is Oxygen XML, and it's a player in the data creation and validation market. And it's a really nice tool. It's one of the ones that I like to use because it works on multiple platforms. It's not limited to just Windows. But even though it has XML in the name, it does a really good job with JSON and JSON schema. They've very recently, actually it's not that recent anymore, but in the last few years they've added really good support for it, first-class support. So here we are, back in that same directory structure. And you can see that we've got the claim subdirectory open with these test instances, and I've got one of them open. And now it's not doing any validation just yet. And to get it to, I have to associate this particular instance with a JSON schema, just like we did in VS Code. Although it's not as easy here as it is in VS Code, where you can just do it once per project and be done with it. And you can't really use wildcards either. So I think there's a couple of suggestions, for these folks moving forward. But anyway, so the first way that I'm going to show on how to associate the schema, forgive me, this little pop-up window, it's covering the button I need to press. I'm going to have to unmaximize, I think, here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, just got to it. Okay, so you can specify a schema. So now you can navigate to a location on your hard drive. I've got one here that I used recently. It's that same claim schema that we were using back in VS Code. And now, unfortunately, the way that this works is it actually modifies the file. You might see here at line 2, it put in this extra line, and this is where it stores that association. It's the kind of thing that is actually in the specification for XML, a way to associate things back. But with JSON schema, to the best of my knowledge, this isn't actually part of the specification. This is something that some companies have done as a way to associate the instances with schemas. And if that's changed recently and I didn't know it, please go ahead and correct me in the comments. But to the best of my knowledge, it's not actually part of the specification. But you could see that it is working. This is that same instance that we looked at before. After associating it, it's validating. These are these known errors where you can't have this particular property there, and same with this one here. So you can specify on a file-by-file basis like we've done here, but they also have what's called a validation scenario. So let me make sure that this is empty. Here we go. Okay, so it's no longer associated with that schema, and we can see that it's not highlighting any of the issues that we know are in this file. So I've created a couple of validation scenarios here, and there's a couple of ways to get to this in the tool. I just go to the validate menu up here and go to the validation scenarios. You can see I've put 3 of them in here, and the way these work is it's very similar to what we were looking at in VS Code, in that its purpose is the same, to be able to associate schemas with the instances. And now here, what they have is a way to specify the project directory. That's that PDU variable. And then you could specify your own path all the way down. And then this variable is the file name that is currently open. And there might be a better way to do this, but this is the way that I've found. What I would have preferred would be able to just specify claim and then say all the instances in all the subdirectories. I'd like to have this claim schema associated with everything underneath claim, but wasn't able to find a way to do that using the glob specification or any wildcards at all. I wasn't able to get that to work. So again, if somebody else is able to do that, it'd be great to share with the rest of the community. But so this is going to go by the individual subdirectory, and I only created it for the invalid ones because that's the one that's interesting to look at right now. So all you have to do is enable it. Once you've created these, you turn it on and associate it, and it runs really quick. And so it ran and told us there's these 2 errors, and those are those same 2 errors that we've seen because it's the same instance, it's the same schema, so it's working as expected. So that's the second way to do schema validation in Oxygen XML. And it looks like we have time left over. So if it's okay, I'd like to ad-lib one last section that I added here that the CIECA folks don't know about yet. But basically, this is our tools that Dan mentioned early on in this webinar. And all I'm going to do is run the validation that it does, so you can see the type of output that you get and how quickly it works. So just as a super quick, I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And so just that quick, it validated 77 invalid instances, and up here we're going to see 66 that were valid. So it expected 65 valid ones, and here it expected invalid ones. So they all passed. It found all the validation errors, and as you can see, it was definitely really quick. Now, for us to do that, we use Node and JavaScript, and it uses the AJV validation tool, and that stands for another JSON validator. But anyway, really just wanted to show you that you can also use these things in batch format, as this is doing here. And I believe that's all we have. I think we're going to have some question and answers now coming up, and I'm going to send it back to Paulette.
Okay, so before we get to our question and answers, I'm going to share my screen and let everybody know this is our resources for everything is on CIECA.com. So if you want to get to our release, if you want to see the CAPIS guidelines or the API documentation, and then we have a new CIECA forum. And I wanted to show you real quick. So if you go to CIECA.com and you see our standards, we have our products. And if you go down to our API standards and services, that is where you'll see the CAPIS guidelines, and you can get into claims. If you go to our CIECA releases, here is where you will see the API release. So CAPIS, and here's our BMS releases, and our EMS is at the bottom. And the last thing I wanted to go over is that under support, we have a support request. And if you have a question or a request for us to make changes, you would go in here and submit this request. If you have a tech forum, and this is where you can ask questions to our forum, and we're building this. So we would really appreciate if you have any questions on the BMS, the EMS, or the API standards to come in here and ask a question. This is reviewed by our architecture committee, and we provide information there. And then this will be someplace that all of our members could go when they have questions and see if a question has already been asked or get a new question. So at that time, if you guys have any questions, you can go up to the top. This is the first time that we've used Teams. So where it says chat and QA, and then you have people at the very top of the screen. If you have a question, you can click on the question and answer and ask a question.
All right. Hey, Paulette, while we're waiting to see if anybody has questions, do you want to talk for a minute about what we're getting ready to do with the estimate JSON CAPIS for estimate?
Yeah, we would like to kick off a new product or project committee with estimate so that we can convert the new to our BMS over to the JSON as we did with the other claims and parts and users. So we're getting ready to start on that. And we're also going to be doing assignment. So if you have technical team that would be interested, and that would be more technical, actually building the APIs than it is creating a new workflow and stuff like that. And more of the businesses is more of a technical. And once we get those messages created in those committees, and of course, we'll bring it to the architecture committee and have them review it and do our normal CIECA process. Instead of the last two releases have been the architecture team has done the work themselves, and then we've promoted it. Now we would like to get back into the teams building those and then promoting those up. And we also have a couple other committees working on those. We have the referral committee working on a new API, and we have the AI committee working on a new API, and hopefully the OEM repair procedures will be working on one as well. So we have a lot of different committees that are going on to start building these new APIs. So if you already have an implementation or an API that was built off of the BMS, please join those committees and help us create these new integrations.
Yeah, I'd like to make a further comment about that. This is such a welcome development. If it didn't already say on the heading, I've chaired the architecture committee for CIECA for a number of years now. And of course, I'm very committed to it. I enjoy it, but we've amply demonstrated to everyone on the call today that this architecture committee is composed of geeks who specialize in the electronic commerce tools and techniques and trends. And we think we're pretty good at it. We're dedicated to it. But the collision industry is the other half of the CIECA acronym. And so if what you bring to the industry is knowing about fixing cars, handling claims, that kind of stuff, you're the ones that are desperately needed for the next step of this, to use the technology that we've been investigating and harnessing and get it to work for the solutions you need.
Great. Well, thank you, Dan. It doesn't look like we have any questions, so we'll just move on. I would like to thank Andy Bober, Dan Webster, Jeff Schroeder, Mike Hastings, and Paulette Reed for presenting today. This presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com. I would invite you to check CIECA.com for a schedule of future broadcasts and to watch recordings of past webinars. Links are available under the CCAST tab at the top of the page. CIECA's partnered, oh, no, we haven't done that in this one. So please follow CIECA's social media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and CIECA news. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.